Bueno, ¿qué tal? Buenas noches. Bienvenidos a este evento de Advanced Value Chain Institute. Este evento que creo que es de mucha importancia para todas las empresas de la región, la parte de Nearshoring, y sobre todo cómo está afectando la parte de un activo estratégico para nosotros, que es la parte del talento humano. Entonces, pues bienvenidos, esperemos que les guste. Yo creo que este tema se va a ver muy relevante. Digamos, apenas empieza, no es algo que se vaya a quitar en el corto plazo. Apenas empieza a haber esa guerra de talento, y conforme vayan llegando todas estas empresas que vienen de China y se van a instalar en México, con la apertura de la guerra comercial que existe entre China y Estados Unidos, esta tendencia pues va a seguir por varios años. Entonces, yo creo que una de las cosas que tienen que empezar las empresas a trabajar es la parte de la retención de talento. No toda la retención de talento es a través de incentivos económicos, sino también la retención de talento pues debe ser a través de darle a la gente un desarrollo profesional, que también es lo que uno está buscando, ¿no? Ahora ya voy a cambiar a inglés para poder presentar a Douglas. I'm going to switch to English. Welcome everyone. Today, I have the honor to present Douglas Kent. I don't know if you can move this slide on here. Douglas made a space in a very, very busy agenda. He sleeps more in hotels than in his house. Next week he's going to be in Bangkok. So he made a space to come to Monterrey for second year in a row, which is amazing, and visit some companies of the region, and also to have this feature presentation about nearshoring in Mexico. Douglas is the Executive Vice President of Corporate and Strategic Alliance for ASEM, Association of Supply Chain Management. A lot of people know ASEM as APICS because some of you took the classes maybe 11 years ago, 12 years ago. So the name changed, but ASEM it's still providing the education to make supply chain better. So he's also experienced in 35 years in supply chain transformation. He's part of the executive committee of the United Nations, and he has a degree on international business in Pepperdine University. So I don't want to take more of his time. I leave you with Douglas. Please give me a round of applause for him.
He reminds me of all those things because I keep reminding him that he's still 1 year older than me. So, and that will always be the case with these things. So I hope that we can spend some time together really having a conversation about the amazing situation which is happening right here. Even 1 year ago when we were here, how many were here last year? Just by show of hands? Okay. Good, yeah, some familiar faces. So we absolutely predicted last year that this hypothesis of nearshoring would come to some degree of reality. All of the ecosystem elements were telling us and suggesting that in fact it would be the case. So we're going to have a little conversation about that. I'd like to just spend 2 minutes just talking about ASCM. For those who may know us as APICS or ASEM, it doesn't matter. But in any case, we're the largest nonprofit supply chain association in the world. We have over 50,000 members worldwide. We operate in more than 100 countries, have certified more than 100,000 individuals. But we ourselves have been undergoing a transformation. And as Gustavo mentioned, the reason I spend so much time in the market is to understand and bring back to the association what are the needs that you have. So I hope to impart a little bit of knowledge to you, but I hope you share with me so I can also bring these things back. We've undergone amazing transformation ourselves in the past few years, doubling our product portfolio, doubling our education, certification, and courseware. And we continue to grow like crazy. We just passed the 50,000 member mark last month. So for the first time in history, we're about a $50 million organization worldwide, run by 115 people. So we're very dependent on our partners like Advanced Value Chain and others in the region to help us really do what we need to do inside of the organization itself. Just a few words as well. I'll talk a lot about sustainable supply chain. It's a little bit of a passion of mine. You see Jason and I have our SDG pins on, the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. So we'll talk a little bit about supply chain. As you might have noted as well, I have a new book coming out this year on designing and orchestrating sustainable supply chains. So one of the things that we're focused on in the organization is not only to make supply chains economically sound, but also ethical and ecologically sound. So taking care of people, profit, and planet as well. The organization is a signatory to the United Nations. I had the luxury to represent the association at COP28 this year and get to speak on the panel about sustainable supply chains as well. So let's just talk about what is this thing called nearshoring, right? I think everybody pretty much has an understanding of what nearshoring is. But in fact, it really is about bringing the business operations closer to the market, closer to the demand. Of course, this satisfies a number of initiatives. It typically will speed up our supply chain a little bit. So if we are able to nearshore the manufacturing of products and services, then we have the advantage of typically shortening the cycle time. We oftentimes also lessen the costs associated with things like transportation. As a result of those things, whether purposeful or not, it also helps the environment as well to some degree. This week, a number of companies that I met with also reminded us how much they're doing relative to the selection of suppliers at a localized basis as well. So it's not to say that we're not going to always have a global footprint, but the reality of it is we are localizing a lot of the operations. Now, there are some driving factors to that, as I mentioned before, and we certainly talked about this last year as a prediction. There is an ongoing effort in what is commonly referred to in the industry as the China Plus One strategy. So China Plus One means I can't have my sole dependency in a region which is already demonstrating a high degree of both geopolitical risk and other types of risks. Currency risks, certain monetary fiscal risks associated with their lowering of their own growth rates, etc. So this China Plus One strategy is really driving organizations, many of you in the room, driving organizations to rethink their own global footprints. Think about where they're manufacturing products, where their distribution centers are located, where are their sources of supply. So again, some of these factors, China Plus One with regards to the tensions. We've also had an unprecedented amount of shipping issues. Anybody had a shipping issue recently? Yeah, you're all like, hell yes, of course we have. So it really is a difficult situation. Everything from the potential drought shortage that we have right now suffering in the Panama Canal situation. As you know, there's been a number of pirating activities, shooting at ships coming and going in through and going to and from the Suez Canal as well. Luckily, we have returned back to some degree of normality of available capacities and pricing coming in particularly from Asia into North America. So that's somewhat come back a little bit to normal. At its peak, about the time that I was here last year, just before the time I was here last year in February, we had gone from a shipping container, for example, coming from China into, for example, the Los Angeles port, went from $1,300 per container shipment to $13,000. a 10x during the time of the pandemic, if you could find a container at all, right? So again, not necessarily returning back to pre-pandemic norms relative to capacity and pricing, but to some degree of normality relative to available capacities and relative to the associated pricing. Nearshoring also helps in a couple of other ways. Of course, I talked about the sustainability aspects, shortening the cycle times. It does build a little bit more stability as well. So this is certainly underway. Now, let's go back a little bit in history. Although we work across the globe, those of you who are more than 20 years old, which is not either Gustavo or I, apparently, the US basically decided to get out of the manufacturing business at large, right? At the time, the major recipient of that decision was China, for lots of reasons. The major reason for that was the ability to have access to low labor cost, right? This is, of course, when labor was a major component to the cost of goods sold. With today, the automation, it's a little bit less, right? So the US lost its prowess in being able to do manufacturing, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the numbers. But the reality of it is, during Q4 of last year, for the first time in 20 years, since the US decided to go on this massive outsourcing effort and placing the epicenter for manufacturing for US demand into China, the volume of goods crossing from Mexico through the Laredo border was higher than the volume of goods coming into the US by ship. First time in 20 years, right? It gives you an indication that nearshoring is not a hypothesis. It's a reality, right? And certainly, we'll talk a little bit about, certainly this particular region, because of its manufacturing expertise, its availability of labor, is of course, again, going to be a large recipient of that. Now, what we're going to talk about is what does that mean? Because that's good and bad, right? It also means there's going to be a great deal of pressure to grow the talent at the same pace as receiving the capacities and receiving the demand coming into the state and into the country. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So again, this is not hypothesis. There's a number of reports that would certainly indicate this as being growth. We know already. I mean, who doesn't know about what's happening with Tesla, right? And you know, of course, you all suffered a little bit of the traffic with the expansion of the roads and building of the. Yeah, I get it. So of course that's the case. But you know, if we take a look at, you know, these are really some of the challenges, right? Do we have enough skilled labor? And I want to talk more specifically about that because this is really important. We don't recognize the fact that just receiving the demand coming back into the region means that we have the skill sets for the future. Because at the same time of the pace of the nearshoring is also the requirement for upskilling talent, right? It's not just about, this is not a world where we just need more hands and more bodies and hands to do work, right? It's not, we're not reshoring the simple jobs, right? What we're doing is we're reshoring or nearshoring the need to have capabilities to take advantage of new digital technologies, for example, advanced analytics, the use of AI. I haven't gone to one conference where AI wasn't said about 16 times. I think we should turn it into a drinking game. There's tequila in the back, I think, actually. So the use of artificial intelligence, what does that really mean? What are the new demand planning techniques that we need to have in order to better manage the level of unprecedented demand and supply shifts that are happening? These are technologies that are coming to us very swiftly. And I dare say most companies that I talk to clearly recognize that their ability to upskill, and when I say upskill, I also include not only growing internal talent, but hiring in talent with skills, is not at the same pace as the need, right? And this, of course, creates a talent shortage with the right skill sets, right? I mean, at some point during the pandemic, the need for supply chain professionals at the entry level was so great that if you could spell supply chain and had a heartbeat, you got hired, right? It was like that, right? But now we need to make sure that we're growing the talent certainly at the same pace. The other things that we need to take account of is the fact that, make no mistake about it, we are going to have a new world of regulatory and compliance around environmental standards. Even if, as a country, we're slower in adoption, and let's be honest, we are. Where we sit today, we're slower in adoption for environmental regulation and compliance than other countries around the globe. Agree? Yes. Don't worry. You take a country like Germany, for example. German regulation now says that if you are a German company, you have a headquarters in Germany, independent of where your geographic footprint is, you have to be able to report Scope 3 emissions across your entire supply base. So if I'm a German company operating in Mexico, in the US, in anywhere in the world, I now have to report. This is mandatory. So even from a government standpoint, if you don't realize that it's going to be mandated by your government, believe me, and Europe is the leader in this game, believe me, it will come to you, right? So we have to get ahead of the game relative to the level of regulation around environment and compliance associated with that. That puts a lot of pressure here because, again, the swiftness of the adoption of renewable energy, and we have some water shortages problem, at least it rained today. These are serious issues along with the quality of our infrastructure. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Mexico, if in general, we say, take a look at the interconnectivity between the central, south, and the north, and it's not there. Not where it needs to be, right? The infrastructure coming from the north and crossing the border, et cetera, is much stronger than the ability to get goods from the south of Mexico or central Mexico into the north. So we have infrastructure issues as well, right? So these are problems that we're definitely going to have to tackle in order to build that interconnectivity, to build the infrastructure to ensure that. The other thing we need to be careful of course, if we're nearshoring back, no organization wants to make the same mistakes that they made with China relative to intellectual property rights, right? So if I'm going to be nearshoring, I'm not only going to be moving manufacturing prowess into the region, I'm also going to be doing things like engineering and design. Design chain and supply chain oftentimes are being done in the same location. They're co-located. So we need to make sure that we're also, from a regulatory standpoint, also respecting the fact, which China did not, but respect the fact that we have intellectual property rights that need to be governed on a global basis as well. So I don't mean to sound doom and gloom. I'm here to say, good, we're going to be a great recipient from all of these ecosystem factors, and we're going to have that, the benefit of that moving into the region. But we need to be prepared for that. And we need to go into this with eyes wide open, right? We have to focus on talent. We have to recognize that environmental regulation is coming our way. We have to be concerned about effective infrastructure building. We have to have interconnectivity across the regions inside of the country. We have to respect intellectual property laws. These are all critically important for the success of being that recipient of the China Plus One strategy and the other de-risking which is going on. By the way, the other country which is the biggest benefactor, and there are several countries, but the other country is India. In fact, I'll be in Mumbai in a couple, after Bangkok. I'll be in Mumbai in a couple of weeks, but again, some of the same similar issues there. Great news is, yes, you're going to be a benefactor, but you still have an equal amount of challenges relative to the shortage of skill sets of labor, infrastructure build out, the adoption of digital technologies, etc. Okay? By the way, as we go through this, if you have any questions, we have a mic and feel free to ask questions. We'll have plenty of time for questions afterwards, but I don't want to stand here all day and talk to you. All right, so those are some things to think about. Relative to, again, I just want to take this from the hypothetical to the reality. The red line is you. Okay, that red line is Mexico, right? If you take a look at this in terms of the US trade, the red line here going up, look at the sharp trajectory. Where else do you see that on the chart? Nowhere. Where do you see the downward trajectory? This is China. So, if you want to talk about U.S. trade relations and what's happening in terms of volumes of goods relative to U.S. trade, for example, clearly on a high trajectory, mirroring almost the loss of the trade, the lowering of the trade deficit associated with China. So Canada is also doing quite well as well. So increasing our relationship with Canada, much smaller, larger geography, but again, not necessarily a place that you think about as an import nation relative to manufactured goods. But certainly Canada is also on the rise. Again, the combination of Canada and Mexico has now outpaced any of the imports coming in from China. So just a little bit of the reality associated with that. Now, there's some other things we have to think about, right? So when we think about what's happening relative to coming and bringing all this new business into China, is we have to look at what it means from a minimum wage standpoint. And this, every time I'm in Mexico, I get depressed by this, right? The reality of the country's minimum wage, I don't have to tell you, is here, 200, it just increased January 1st. I know it's a little bit different in the northern regions, but this is on average, the country average. This is more or less the equivalent of about $17 per day. Most of the US states, minimum wage is set in the US by state, right? There's a minimum wage by the nation, and that gets overridden by the minimum wage by the state. For example, the number one state in the US for minimum wage, it runs back and forth between Washington State and California, two west coast of the states, right? They run just about $16.50 per hour. This is the same equivalent as the minimum wage per day in Mexico, right? So I'm just here to remind us of that because yes, there is an economic advantage because there's a lower minimum wage, but there's a higher need for higher skill sets, which means that the minimum wage is going to, it's not really going to be a factor because you're going to have to pay the economic value for the skilled worker that's coming here, right? And I think most of us already recognize that to be the case. So that's clearly going to be the case. Now, if we take a look at that, and you take a look at what's called real hourly minimum wage, right? And I've defined it here for you. The real hour minimum wage refers to the amount a worker earns per hour after adjusting for inflation. And this is normalized here. So you can see, for example, this is Mexico and this is the US, right? This means that at the same time, we're not seeing the increase in minimum wage at the same pace as inflation. So effectively, I don't earn enough to buy the same basket of goods I did a few years ago. I know most of us feel the same way, right? Every time I go to the grocery store, I'm like, really? One bag of groceries is $100? What is crazy? The same amount of goods would have been much less before. So again, I'm just trying to build the fact that there's going to be additional economic pressure. When you have workers that are starting to gain the skills, and we need them to gain the skills, we're going to have to pay more for those workers. We have to make sure that they have what we call a fair living wage. I had the luxury of speaking at the United Nations General Assembly in September as well on a panel which was talking about what is the impact of a fair living wage when we have all this movement of nearshoring and outsourcing and et cetera going along the world. We can't expect that we can continue to put the pressure to manage the incoming of goods and pay the same rate. It's a farce. It will not happen, right? So it's very important that we also manage the economic conditions associated with that. Now, the good news here is that the nation of Mexico is doing a fantastic job relative to unemployment, right? I mean, it really is, it's at a low, right? I mean, you have employment rates that outpace the U.S., has continued to outpace the U.S. for the last 4 or 5 years, right? I mean, the U.S. was at one point going completely crazy double-digit unemployment figures. It's now normalized back again. But you've had a pretty steady rate of unemployment for quite some time, which is a really good thing, right? It builds a lot of stability as well. But unfortunately, when we have disruption in economic conditions, then it's always perplexing to me, but then oftentimes what we see companies do is they start to pull back, right? And where's the first area they cut? Training. Well, actually first is travel. I talked to a couple of you about that today, right? Oh, you can't go anywhere anymore. You got to do everything by Zoom. But training is one of the areas really, which is really quite ignorant. Right? And I'd say that to a CEO sitting in front of me saying, this is the worst time ever not to invest in your people. Right? It's a time in which we know that demand is going to outpace supply. We know we have a critical shortage of talent. And yet the first thing you want to do is not to grow your people. That's a ridiculous concept, right? This is the time in which we absolutely need to invest in our people. And when we talk about, and as Gustavo said, the conversation today is it's going to be a talent war, right? Let's face it, we're going to be massively creating demand through the nearshoring effort. You already have record low unemployment. You have workers who can't afford a living wage, and you're asking to upskill them, right? So you're going to have to invest in your most critical asset, which of course is going to be your talent. And it's no easy challenge because what we're asking for is to grow talent again with a lot of new things getting thrown at them at the same time, right? What is AI? How do I take advantage of digital technologies? These are things that, sometimes the need for the skill is outpacing our ability to grow the talent. So we need to be able to do that effectively. It's going to be a combination. It's going to be a combination of upskilling existing talent and hiring the skill sets that you need, right? I talked to a number of companies. I think we saw 7 companies already this week here, large companies. And we talked a lot about what's your turnover? What's your turnover been? What's your employee retention been over the last? And there was a wide range, right? And also depending upon the level of the employee, right? And I won't say who or what, but it went from some companies were at an impressive 3-4%, and others were at 30%. Right? So let's expect that it's probably going to be, in my guesstimate, it's going to be on the higher end of that, right? Particularly when you start seeing options come in and you start losing talent and et cetera. And if you have made the silly decision not to invest in talent, then you can expect it's going to certainly exacerbate the problem. On the regulatory side, from an ESG standpoint, environmental regulations, et cetera, it's been a history, right? It's a history of things that have happened and government stepping in and signing up to the SDG goals, which was a 2015 initiative, as you might recall. So at COP28, which is the climate change summit that is hosted by the United Nations, where we had 70,000 people together, represented by a lot of the country signatories. Well over 100 countries are signed up to the SDG goals. So from 2015 to now, all right, these are goals that are now being set for 2030. It was more or less a 15-year initiative, which means we're approximately halfway there. What do you think our progression on the SDG goals is? We're halfway through the time frame. We're 20% of the way there. So countries really need to wake up to the fact that we are not going to fulfill the needs for the planet, and SDGs are broader than just planet, but the reality of it is we're not going to fulfill those needs by doing the same things that we do today. This is not a problem we can recycle our way out of, right? This is where you start to get into new concepts where design chain and supply chain have to work together to solve this problem. This is known as the circular economy. Circular economy means I need to design my products such that they can be repurposed, they can be reused, they can be resold, not just to be recycled, right? I have to start pressing how many are in sourcing in the room? How many in procurement or sourcing, right? Right? Hopefully you're feeling pressures to say, in some of my raw materials, I can't just buy virgin product. I have to buy product that has been recycled. And I should have goals that set that, right? It's one of the reasons we introduced our new Building a Sustainable Supply Chain course, Because the reality of it is we have a lot of companies, and I won't ask you who raised your hands, but I'm going to guess that somewhere one of your executives who likely has some degree of accountability for sustainability said out loud to the media in public, we're going to be net zero by blah, 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 or we're going to do that. And we in supply chain are going, I don't know how we're going to do that. I mean, this is happening all over. I describe it as the fact that the aspiration is so much higher than our ability to operationalize that into our supply chain. Quite honestly, we don't know. It's a hope and a prayer, right? And so we need to be able to figure out this equation. As nations, we're not making the progression. In fact, there are 3 of the 17 SDG goals that in the last 2 years, from the last reporting to the time we reported at COP28, which was in November of the last year, 3 SDGs went backwards. Our progression went backwards. So again, this means that from a supply chain perspective, which is a major contributor to what we think about when we think about the climate impacts, it's undeniable that supply chain is in control of a number of those things. That we have to stand up and rethink our operating models, rethink what we do, localize sources of supply, buying non-virgin materials as a part of our process. Working with, how many are engineers in the room? Really, that many of you? Why the hell are you here? No. It's a sorry. For those online, I apologize. Please put how much I've offended you into the chat. This is a community that doesn't have the conversation. The design chain and the supply chain must have the conversation in order to make the impact which is necessary, right? So we have to have the conversation. Engineers can't simply design in isolation and hope that supply chain can pick up the problem and do something with it, right? It has to start from the beginning, right? I have the luxury of working, does anybody know the Ellen MacArthur Foundation? Do you know who Ellen MacArthur is? She was the first woman to sail solo around the world. She now has a foundation that's solely focused on circularity. We're partners with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And it's all about building circular economies. We have to bring the communities of people who are responsible for design chain, supply chain, and sustainability. We need to sit in the same room and figure this puzzle out. It's absolutely required of us to be able to do that. Again, there's a lot of things that are going on relative to, I focus mostly on these sustainable development goals here, but there's a lot of things that are going to be coming our way. And I already mentioned one of them, which is you have to be able to know that your supply base is managing as sustainable as you need to be managing. Yes, exactly. Let's celebrate. Yes, exactly. But don't mistake it. You're going to be forced to understand. You have to be able to have visibility and transparency in your supply base. It's going to be required. It means that you have to hold your suppliers accountable for being as sustainable as you desire to be. Your executive who's out there making these statements about where you're going to be by 2030 or where you're going to be by 2040, you're not going to get there without the engagement of your supply base. The sad part about it is if you take a look at the hierarchy, we talk about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. Honestly, if I said to you, how many of you have visibility to your tier 3 suppliers and what are their sustainability initiatives that are underway? And are they able to report their greenhouse gas emissions? I'm going to guess that no one in this room is going to raise their hand and say, I have absolutely understand the visibility and have transparency into my scope 3 emissions of my tier 3 suppliers. Anybody want to deny that? Online? All right. So, and again, I'm just painting the picture that unfortunately we're not making the progression that we need. We want to leave a planet for our children. We need to be able to do more in the supply chain to do it. We cannot do it alone. It has to be in coordination with the 8 of you who raised your hand and sadly said you were engineers. We have to be able to have the conversations with our supply base. We have to make decisions, tough decisions, Those who said they were insourcing and procurement, it means sometimes I can't take the cheaper price. I have to choose the most sustainable supplier, right? And work my way around that problem, right? So we got to rethink how these things work. Again, this was at the SDG summit that we had in New York at the General Assembly. And of course, these SDGs do play a very critical goal in what we're trying to achieve. And our supply chains have to be redesigned to take advantage of sustainability. It's undeniable. So if we take a look at how much time that you as supply chain professionals, those of you who either work directly in the supply chain or interface with the supply chain, how much time are you spending thinking about the decisions you take every day and its relative impact to the environment? How many of you are involved in a sales and operations planning process or work in some way, shape, or form on affecting inventory strategy? Liars, I know there's some of you in the room and you're denying it. You're like, he's like the comedian in the front of you. I'm not raising my hand, he's gonna call him. Or the magician, right? So for example, am I thinking about what's the impact of these decisions and how it might impact inventory, and how inventory, which is, by the way, the number one way in which we fund resiliency. Think about what I just said. Our major choice for building a more resilient supply chain, being able to weather the storm of the ups and downs, unexpected, how do we fund it? Number one way, with inventory. How many of you had to expand your warehouse footprint to hold the inventory because you were scared you weren't going to get the things you needed and you wanted to protect the... Yeah, I know, I was there today. I appreciate your honesty, however. But that's the honest reality. Our number one, Jason, my colleague here, always says, got a hunch, buy a bunch, right? So we have to be able to do something different. Again, rethinking our operating models in order to withstand that. The other thing that we have to be focused on is understanding the trends within the industry. What is happening, right? This is not supply chain. The greatest part about being in the supply chain is the fact that it's ever changing. Anybody bored? I never met a supply chain professional that said they were bored, right? I mean, the reality of it is there's so much stuff that's hitting us all the time. The question is, how do we become more predictive about what those things are? So every year we started this about 7 years ago. We have a committee which is called our Sensing Committee. This is a worldwide group of supply chain professionals that try to predict what are the biggest trends which are happening to the supply chain that are going to affect our world. This is the top 10 trends for 2024. Probably no big surprises here. Digital supply chain, big data analytics, our drinking game of AI is in there as well. Investing in supply chain systems and people. This is actually a new one that just made the list for the first time this year. These two just swapped, right? One went up, one went down. Big data and analytics was top of the list for 3 years in a row, right? It now just slipped one, and digital overlapped that, right? Big data always makes me laugh because I'm like, we haven't even figured out what to do with little data, let alone big data. But anyway. The need for analytics, as I mentioned, a critical capability that organizations need to have. I mentioned this one already: visibility, traceability, location intelligence. Right? This is a sad. A lot of you build, very expensive pieces of industrial equipment and other things, right? And why is it that somebody can order something on Amazon and know where it is in the 2-day period it takes it to get it? It's a $5 item, and I have more location intelligence than I do on my big piece of machinery that costs $10,000 and is somewhere between here and wherever the heck it's going to, right? So we have to be able to increase that capabilities. Certainly resiliency does have a high dependency on understanding potential disruption, risk management, and risk mitigation. We have a lot of risks which are facing us, but we can't mitigate every risk. This is a recipe for bankruptcy. We absolutely need to be able to understand how to prioritize risk, how to monetize that risk. Risk typically falls into a category of understanding what's the probability of a risk event occurring versus the impact, or multiplied by the impact that that event could have on my organization. This is what's known as VAR, value at risk, right? Probability times impact. This gives us the ability to quantify risk and help us prioritize what risks we would choose potentially to mitigate. Building agility, cybersecurity has been building agility it's a new one, but not really. It kind of had some other names before. Cybersecurity, massive problem, absolutely massive problem. If you follow the money in cybersecurity, if you have a data breach, your valuation of your company on average drops more than 15% in one day. If I'm a retailer, if I'm a banking institution, if I'm an insurance agency, and suddenly all of my data got hacked, watch the stock price. On average, it's a multi-billion-dollar loss for these companies overnight. On average, greater than 15%. Imagine how much time it takes for you to gain 15% valuation just to lose it overnight because you haven't protected your data. Very serious issue. And trust me, the higher the potential disruption with political tension, the greater is the degree of cyber risk. Countries will attack other countries. They will attempt to use cyber as a weapon to destabilize the economy. Most of, for example, if you think about the cyber risks or the cyber events which have happened, most of those were orchestrated outside of their own country. That is not by accident, right? The higher the political tension, the higher the percentage of times in which you're going to have a cybersecurity attack which is orchestrated outside of your home country. So that's for sure. Green and circular supply chains, as I already mentioned. And of course, what we're really talking about here is the sort of geopolitical situation, or really what we've referred to as the deglobalization of the supply chain, meaning we're doing things like localizing supply, we're doing nearshoring, onshoring efforts as well. So there's a full report you can get from our website on this. It's the top 10 trends. We publish it every single year. And this also drives a lot of what we do relative to, okay, well, if this is important, then how do we educate around these things? I'll show you later, but we, for example, just introduced a brand new certificate on supply chain technology, which talks about what is big data and analytics? What are the new trends in demand planning? How do we utilize artificial intelligence? What the heck is blockchain, right? These kinds of things are seriously important for us. So as an organization, all of these things that are happening around us really drive the work that we do. Now, the Association of Supply Chain Management is a little bit different than other associations because we really have three stakeholders, right? We have you as individuals. Many of you are members of the Association of Supply Chain Management, have taken advantage of some of our talent. You've got certified, you've taken a course, apparently taught by Gustavo sometime in the last 40 years. That's all around our talent development initiatives, and that's super important for us, and as an association is the mainstay of what we do. But we also need to focus on our corporate stakeholder. These are corporations who are corporate members with us, who really come in and ask us to assist them on helping with their transformative efforts. How do I transform into a new operating model? How do I transform in nearshoring? How do I put my acquisition together that I bought another company and forever it shall remain separate, right? How do I take advantage of that and make 1 + 1 = 3, right? How do I introduce a new ERP system? How do I introduce a new advanced planning system? How do I take advantage of warehouse management and transportation management capabilities, right? These are all drivers for how do I take any of those digital capabilities. These are all drivers for transformation. So now we provide education and assistance, coaching assistance for how to build a new transformation initiative. We have a brand new certification called Certified in Transformation of Supply Chain. Why? Because you told us, I need to transform my supply chain And I don't have the skill sets to do it. I don't have the people who understand and can think outside of the box. I don't have people that know how to unlearn. I don't know how people who can really lead the organization through the change management and the project management that is necessary to truly transform the business, right? So that's our corporate stakeholder around transformation. We also have, of course, the community, and this is where we get involved in the sustainability efforts that I mentioned earlier, but also on our foundation side. So we do a lot of work. In fact, the reason I'm going to Bangkok is because of the work we're doing with USAID, United Nations, IAPHL, some of the other acronym. It's like alphabet soup in the global health world. Choose your acronym. But in essence, it's to make sure that as supply chain professionals and as an association, that we're doing everything we can to make sure that marginalized communities can get the critical medicines, vaccines that they need in order to survive, right? Which is horribly failing, particularly on the continent of Africa, right? So we work very closely with these global health professionals. We have a whole set of maturity standards that we've built to ensure that we as an association are contributing to the community at large. I can be in a small village in a country in Africa and I can get a Coca-Cola every single day, but I can't get my vaccine or medicine for malaria, right? That's a problem in the supply chain, right? So those are the things that we're focused on as an association, and super proud to be leading the charge on some of these new initiatives to be able to actually live our mission, which is to make the world better through supply chain, which means we need to focus on talent. We need to focus on corporations that are trying to transform, and we need to focus on what's necessary from the community. So we've done that, right? In the last 2 years, we've doubled our portfolio of products and certification products and education products and courseware to be able to satisfy some of these needs. And I mentioned some of them, and I won't bore you with the details, but most of you know about CPIM, CSCP, and CLTD. These are our mainstay certifications. Some of you are holders of those certifications, and I thank you for that. I know those exams aren't easy. So that's certified in planning and inventory management, certified supply chain professional, and certification logistics, transportation, and distribution. And then our new one, which is CTSC, which is the certified in transformation of supply chain. That's our newest release, just came out in our beta test in November of last year. We also recognize that you need also in your organizations foundational learning. New entries, new professionals coming into the supply chain world, right? Those of us who have been around for a while, we never chose to be in supply chain. I don't know. It happens. I went to the job board and that said expediter at GE. I had no idea what an expediter was, but I said, oh, look, when this one pays more than this, let's go there. And then suddenly I was expediting semiconductor parts for color televisions. And that was in 1983, right? I know, you're thinking, he doesn't look that old. But trust me, I am, but still 1 year younger than him. Anyway, so then we have the certificate programs. This is a brand new portfolio of products we didn't even have. This is not the same high stakes certification here, but this is a certificate that's it's a little bit narrow in focus, but critical, right? We have one in planning, we have one in warehousing, we have one in procurement. Our two most recent ones, which I mentioned, supply chain technology, but also we have one in supply chain resiliency. How do we teach people to understand what risk means, how to mitigate risk, how to measure risk, how to quantify risk? All things that are necessary so that you don't immediately revert to using inventory as your answer to resiliency. So these are all new programs that have just been released. We also have a brand new, super excited, I hope you take advantage of it, Building a Sustainable Supply Chain course. It's a 2-day course, or the equivalent of a 2-day course, depending on how it's taught virtually or otherwise. But this is really how to take that aspirational statement of I want to be net zero, or I want to do this, or I want to do that, and make it a reality into the supply chain. It talks about GRI metrics, it talks about the SDGs, it talks about how to measure Scope 3 emissions, it talks about all the things which are a little blurry in most people's minds. It's still relatively new, so try to take advantage of that. And then of course we continue to offer training around our SCORE model. How many are familiar with the SCORE model, Supply Chain Operations Reference Model? Thank you. Thank you. Prizes for the two in the front. No. The SCORE model developed initially in 1997. By far the best framework to use to diagnose the health of your supply chain. It gives you a framework for all the processes. It defines every key metric in supply chain connected with those processes. It talks about the best practices, the skills and competencies which are necessary for a supply chain. And guess what? It's free. Completely free. All of our standards, our digital standards, our supply chain operations reference model standards, and our sustainability standards, I fought like heck. See, I didn't do it. You can't put it into chat. I fought like heck to make sure that one of the things that we were doing for the community is to take everything that was behind a paywall. In other words, you had to become a member of our association to access these critical standards to remove that paywall. So now our SCORE digital standard, our digital capabilities model, and our sustainability standards are all accessible for anyone in the world free of charge. You can find it directly on our website. Okay? So those are the things that we've been working on. Again, more or less to satisfy this need to say, we played very well up here as a supply chain professional with certifications for those who are really trying to upskill themselves or organizations needed them to be upskilled. We continue to grow that portfolio with the new addition of the certification around transformation. But all of these new certificate programs and our entry-level Foundations of Supply Chain Management Learning, which is 45 different modules, which can be tailored and customized to your need. These products didn't exist 24 months ago. Did not even exist, right? We had 3 certification products and that was pretty much it. So we've been hard at work, again, working with you to understand what your needs are, coming back and doing development. And that's really, why I, again, spend the time to learn that. This is the SCORE model, as I mentioned before. There is a class which is coming up if you're interested, taught here by Advanced Value Chain. It's coming up on April the 19th. I'll let Gustavo talk a little bit more about, or Osvaldo talk a little bit more about that as well. The new model release happened, this is the new model of supply chain, talks about the major, what we call level 1 processes, as you can see here. So plan, order, source, transform, fulfill, return. You see the regenerative aspect of sustainability in there, and then you see these critical orchestrate functions. These orchestrate functions represent things like regulatory and compliance, business rules, big data, all these types of things that make the processes work well, taking advantage of your technologies, all these types of things. So if you're not familiar with the SCORE model, go have a look at it. Again, it's free. You have free access to that. Take a look at its structure. It's been used by more than 5,000 companies across the world to diagnose their supply chain, to build that new operating model for the future. And if you have an interest in that, then please join the class. I've taught more SCORE classes than anyone else on the planet. So, because I was around in version 1, which was released in 1997. So it's just a great tool for you to understand how to use and take advantage of that. And there's lots of tools that surround that. I won't go through all of these, but SCORE is the heart of our transformation initiatives. So as I said before, helping companies, helping corporations build transformation initiatives, these are going to be based upon SCORE. And we do have authorized partners like Advanced Value Chain and some others around the globe that will assist you in helping your transformation efforts in a different way than you might get used to, right? So it's not like pay $1 million to McKinsey and they come back with a report and wish you the best. Right, this is something a little different than that, right? This is trying to build, yeah, some of you go, yeah, I spent that $1 million. So, sorry. But this is really about coaching you through, teaching you how to be transformative leaders, and actually working with you directly to build those transformation programs. And again, it includes all types of tool sets that we've developed and you have access to, okay? One of the things, of course, is to take a look at some of the case studies that we have on the utilization of SCORE. I've been involved in almost all of these, Roche and Petrobras in particular. Maybe Petrobras is one you might know. Petrobras is the largest oil and gas company, the largest company in Brazil, but certainly I can't say monopoly, but it's more or less a monopoly. Sorry, please delete. But we started working with Petrobras, for example, and they themselves in their case study, you can read all about it. This came out of some initiatives we were working with them, and they said, hey, we don't have an S&OP process which is effective. So we did a transformation. We went around that little racetrack, which I just showed with you. We coached them through the efforts. In 2 years, they saved $800 million. Right? That's their words, not mine, right? Roche Pharmaceutical. If you're familiar with Roche Pharmaceutical, we did 5 transformation projects with Roche in the clinical side of the business, which is way more difficult. Pharmaceuticals is difficult in and of itself. Anybody in pharma? Okay, then I can talk about pharma and you can't tell me if I'm right or wrong. So in the pharma world, in clinical, having a stock out is a multi-million-dollar mistake, right? If I'm running a clinical trial and I have patients that are needing medicines at a certain day and time, if I don't have that, the trial is gone, right? And these trials cost millions of dollars, right? It's also a weird world because of that, I'm not concerned about inventory. And in clinical trials, we write out of about 70% of the medicines which are produced. We throw them away. So it's also bad from that perspective. So Roche Pharmaceutical engaged our organization to assist them with that. Another great case study, they decreased their cycle time and their stockouts were like nil, right? Which never happened before. So very interesting case study from that perspective. This is something I'll spend a few minutes on because I'm going to encourage you to take advantage of this. Let me start by saying it's free. Okay? So this is a score-based supply chain maturity assessment. So this is allowing you the opportunity to use our tool set to assess where your maturity is across different supply chain processes. And there are 27 categories which are being utilized to judge the level of maturity that you have. This helps the conversation. It talks by doing and performing this particular assessment. Simply, you'll be receiving an individual link to a survey. You typically would spread that out across your organization around different functions within the supply chain. And then we take a look at the aggregated responses. It is anonymous to the people who respond. We aggregate the responses and we come back with a formal readout and tell you, here are your strengths and weaknesses. And by the way, where there are weaknesses, here are things you can do to overcome those weaknesses in the future, including what training materials or education programs or certifications would be necessary for you to close some of the gaps in your maturity level. It will clearly demonstrate in many instances how you're mature in some areas but not mature in others. Therefore, your end-to-end effectiveness of your supply chain is desperately not performing in the way you want because you've underinvested in some areas and perhaps even overinvested in others. So please take advantage of the maturity assessment. I will pause here for a commercial moment. If you want to take the assessment, please take a picture of this. I think we'll go to the form, right, Jason? So you go to a form, you simply fill out the form. Again, any of you can take advantage of this for your company. We can orchestrate that with folks here from Advanced Value Chain. And you will have a personalized company readout of this assessment, right? It takes about between 60 and 90 minutes to complete the assessment. Again, what happens quite simply is you receive for your company an individual company link. That link connects you to the survey. You distribute the survey to the respondents you would want to have fill out the survey. We will aggregate the responses and come back to you and do a formal readout so you and your stakeholders across the organization can see what you said relative to your maturity level. This is not us assessing you. This is you assessing yourself. right? And then we start the ideation process of what you can do differently to close some of the maturity gaps, right? So please, we spent almost 6 months, right, Jason? Almost 6 months developing this tool to give it away for free. So again, please take advantage of this. I think you'll find it quite enlightening, and I think you'll see that it will illuminate some of the areas that you probably already know are weak, but now you have a collective opinion to start to do something about it. The great thing is it's based on a more factual basis than just simply, somebody emotionally screaming about why something's not working, right? So it's a little bit easier. We also have a sustainability set of tools that is also available. So start first with, we have our sustainability standards. This is the enterprise sustainability standards. They go across the supply chain. It's the only comprehensive set of sustainability standards specific to supply chain. Again, it's also free. Just download it. It's wonderful nighttime reading if you're having trouble sleeping. There's about 98 pages of the standards. But I can tell you, very thoughtfully created. And you have the ability to do some assessments against the sustainability standards as well. And you can talk to our team here, and we can also assist you with that. If anybody wants to take the training or wants a sustainability workshop, there are all kinds of things we can do to increase the knowledge base of sustainability across your supply chain community. This was, again, very thoughtfully created, taking the best of the best. In the world of sustainability, there's not a lot of net new. But what never existed was a set of sustainability standards which was specific to the supply chain. So I'm not saying anything about ISO 14001 or the Dow Jones Sustainability Index or Malcolm Baldrige Awards or other things, but none of them directly have been correlated to the supply chain. And that's exactly what we've done relative to building these sustainability standards. We've also worked with the United Nations to directly connect where supply chain connects to the SDG goals and also the GRI metrics. So if you're familiar with the global reporting initiatives, these are metrics that you utilize for sustainability standards, and these are all the SDG goals where we see, for example, where we have connectivity to each of the SDG goals. So how many of you have a corporate focus on SDG or contribution to SDG? Okay, a few. That's why we're only 18% of the way there. This will help gain some understanding, gain some traction relative to that. And this is something that is a big focus within the sustainability workshop, is to gain an understanding of how you as in supply chain can contribute to the SDG standards. I don't know if that one's going to work. Let's see. Let me give that a try. This should connect you to the standards. If not, you can go on the website. That looks a little cloudy to me, but hopefully it works. Okay, good. Maybe it's me that's looking cloudy. Again, these standards are available to you. Please download them, have a look at them. If you want to have further conversation about these standards, we're happy to assist with that. And so let's just close out, and then we'll take some time for some questions if you'd like, and allow the gentleman to kind of close this out. It's not a hypothesis. There's going to be a massive impact, both good and a little bit scary, about what's happening relative to nearshoring here in Mexico. The numbers are there, right? We don't have to pretend like it's not coming, because it's going to come, and it's going to look a little bit more like a tidal wave than a slow walk into the ocean, right? It's going to be a little bit scary from that perspective. We're going to have to meet the challenge by investing in our people. Supply chain talent is going to become even more of a shortage than perhaps it is today. And the need for that talent to have new skill sets to take us into the new world is going to be even more paramount than it is today. Again, the speed at which we're trying to adapt into new digital technologies, or to make our supply chains more sustainable, to de-risk the supply chains, to understand and gain visibility in our tier 2 and 3 supply base. These are things which are absolutely going to happen. So we need to have, a structured approach to do that. If you're trying to develop, what's the high-level plan for supply chain education and training and certification, we can help you with that. If you want to get down into what we call PDP level, personal development plan level, we have tools and talent assessments which can help you with that as well. So it's important that that you understand, hopefully, that as an association and as a partner here, that we can help and assist with what that journey is going to look like. If transformation is on your mind and you feel like maybe you need some coaching and assistance to make that journey happen, we have obviously some solutions for that. And of course, Advanced Value Chain, as our premier lead partner in the region, is also here to help. So thank you for bearing with all that I just threw at you, and thinking, why did they invite him back a second time? Hopefully imparted some knowledge, but I'd love some questions. So if you have some questions, Osvaldo has a mic here. Let's have some Q&A. For those of you online, if you have some questions, I think we have someone monitoring the chat, and we can take any questions for those who are online as well. Yep.
Hi. Yeah. So, a very good presentation. Thank you.
That's a great way to start. Thank you for coming. Good night. Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, from a logistics standpoint, what do you recommend for companies to do to be more sustainable? Because I have a logistic company, and sometimes I go with the value proposition of optimizing routes or something like that to make less contamination, and companies here in Mexico doesn't care. So what is your recommendation for us to go with companies and still pitch that and do business?
Yeah. First of all, a great question, but sad that we don't care. But don't let go of it. Again, your ability to be able to recommend transportation routes which are both cost effective and sustainable, because those are not, those don't have to be a trade-off, right? You can achieve both. I think if you have the ability to continue to represent that together, cost effective routing and scheduling, modes of transport, etc., as well as what the sustainability impact factors are simultaneously, I think you're going to be ahead of most. It's an industry. I was in Las Vegas last week. We were at one of the big shows that focused on transportation and logistics there. There were 5,000 people, 5,000 logistics professionals gathered together. And this will be the wave of the future. Again, it's not going to, we're in complete denial if we think that these choices aren't going to be made visible and people are not going to be pressured and it's not going to be driven by regulation. So stay true to what you think is right relative to including the sustainability impacts with the choices that are being made. What we need is the systems to catch up with that. So today's transformation systems, which are making those choices, don't often include the variable of sustainability in how it makes its choices. So this is a big ask of the TMS providers, if you will, to make this a standard part of these trade-offs, right? Right now it's basically cost and time optimized, right? It's not sustainability optimized, and that's gonna need to change. And it is. By the way, they're including these variables. I'd say still optional for inclusion, but you're seeing a lot more evidence of that happening, for sure.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yep.
You were talking about how Mexico has a regular and a high employee or a low unemployment number, but you were included, which we call not formal employees, right?
So it includes all employment. So what do you mean? You mean including whether I'm employed as a contractor, or you mean hourly versus salary, or?
In Mexico, we divided our workforce in formal employment and not formal or informal, right? So that number should affect how this will be developed.
So this would be including of both, right? Informal and informal. Yeah. And this is why you see the number probably I don't want to say artificially higher because, you know, how do you define depending on how you define the informal part, but this would be all forms of employment.
They don't pay taxes. That's informal.
Ah.
The guy that sells food
Yeah.
in the
Flowers
streets.
in the
or
corner.
Yeah.
And those are a big number of
Yeah,
workers.
yeah, and it's that we see that a lot. Like as you know, like when I'm in Bangkok next week or I'm in Mumbai after that, it's going to be the same. But the numbers that get reported because those are numbers that are coming from the country, from the government, will be inclusive of both, right? I don't know exactly how they do the calculation on the informal side. Those are numbers coming from the government, yeah. Which I'm 99% certain are both formal and informal. Maybe you know better than I, but I'm sure it is both.
Yeah, it includes both.
Yeah.
Yeah, and do you expect those to affect how it will be developed?
Sorry, ask one question one more time.
Yeah.
Do
you are accounting for this difference?
Well, I think the greater becomes the talent gap, the more it's more likely that we'll see a trend of moving from informal to formal because we need people, right? So and I think that's good for the country in any case, right? I mean, taxation aside, I think it's good to have a more stable form of employment, and don't have the dependency on the informal ways of making working. In India, I had some experience on this in India as well, because there's an entire informal workforce which is what we call collectors. They're collecting bottles and plastics and getting. It's a very critical part of the workforce. But of course, it's as you describe it. It's an informal side, right? They go out every day, and these mothers go out and turn in recyclable plastic bottles and cans and etc. To get money, right, and to feed families. And that's a good example of an informal workforce. Now it becomes crucially important because now we're dependent upon recycled plastics, and if we didn't have that community, which is desperately marginalized, I mean, we do not even place any degree of importance on that. And you know, that's a shame, because we need to also respect that this informality of ways of working and gaining money also contribute greatly to the effective nature of supply chains, and we wouldn't have the degree of recycled plastics if we didn't have people doing that. It's not their formal job, but it's how they make money. It's how they live. Yeah.
I have a question too.
Okay.
With so many
You have
baby
two
boomers-
questions or a question also? No.
With so many baby boomers retiring, what should be the role of the older generation, like Gustavo, for example?
I love it. Join the bandwagon.
in
Exactly.
mentoring the newer generations. I'm also an instructor, so I think it's something that is concerning to me. What is the responsibility to the younger generations?
Yeah, I'm not going to include myself in that category. I still have a lot more work to do and more energy than you can imagine. I think it's exactly that. I think looking for opportunities to be an instructor, to be, I've been adjunct faculty for 22 years because I love teaching students. Mentorship responsibilities, taking positions as on board of directors, for example. This is a great opportunity. Informally becoming a mentor. How about joining the Association of Supply Chain Management and becoming a volunteer on the things that we're creating? Everything that you saw that we developed, we are the shepherds of the development of that. We don't do it ourselves. This is all done by the supply chain community. And there are a massive number of volunteer efforts, academic committees, content committees, young professional committees. There's just a huge amount of volunteer opportunities, whether you're retiring or not retiring, there's a huge amount of volunteer opportunities. So I think exactly that, teach the others, teach the next generation what you've learned, and whether that's through a formalized instructor program, a volunteer, a board member, an informal mentoring. I think these are all great ideas. Yeah.
Thank you.
And you might have some takers on that here soon too. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi.
So right now in Mexico, we've got a super peso. You know, the peso is really appreciated against the dollar, and I mean it has to do with a lot of reasons, with people sending dollars from Mexico to the United States, with the interest rates, but also a big part of the appreciation has to do with nearshoring. But as nearshoring increases, that could have an even bigger appreciation effect on the peso, or keep it at the level that it is right now. But do you think that the appreciated peso could actually deter nearshoring, or that the exchange rate doesn't really affect nearshoring decisions?
I think as long as, so going back to the minimum wage discussion and the effective nature of a real minimum wage, etc. For two industrialized nations, the differential, that GDP differential for two bordering nations, if I'm not mistaken, is the highest in the world. Two bordering nations, right? US, most states trying to get to $17 per hour as a minimum wage within the state. Mexico sitting at $17 per day. That differential of two bordering nations is the highest of, please don't quote me, but I think I'm 99.9% sure, I haven't checked it recently, but up and around a year ago was the highest differential of two bordering nations in the world. I don't think that's going to change too quickly. So there's certainly going to be advantage. But remember, what I would say to, again, I commend you on the question. What I would say is that this is not a low labor cost game anymore, right? That move that I described, somewhat an ignorant move for the US to completely lose the manufacturing capabilities and outsource it, was a low labor chase. At the time, of course, at that point in time, most goods had a high labor content to them. Take a look, for those of you who've been in your businesses for a while, take a look at the amount of workforce for what you produce, what it is today versus what it was 10 years ago. I can guarantee you we have less labor content in our product than we did, right? The use of automation and robotics and things like this are certainly decreasing the amount of dependency that we have on labor. So I don't think, this is not, I criticize the US government as well, thinking for the same things. They're trying to do these things like the CHIPS Act, I don't know if you've heard about this, trying to bring back the dependency on semiconductor product back into the US, etc. This is not about just giving manual labor jobs to people, right? This is a whole new game, right? And it's not a labor game anymore. So I don't think that, what I'm saying to you is, I don't think the dependency on labor is the same as it was 20 years ago. And I also don't think that you can shift that large disparity quickly. It's just not going to happen. It's too big of a disparity to even with the advancement of nearshoring at the pace that it is, I don't think it's going to change very quickly.
Thanks.
And I will say I'm not an economics professor, but
the strong peso always impacts exporters. That's the truth. But the disparity that Douglas is talking about, Mexico is still going to be attractive for nearshoring, and not all the decisions that companies are doing about nearshoring is because of cost. There are some other factors involved. So.
Yeah, and just to add to Gustavo's comment, I think the first foray on the nearshoring, and for obvious reasons, is to satisfy U.S. demand. Because it makes sense, right? You just take it over the border. The reality of it is, I don't think it's going to stay that way. I think that as you increase your country capabilities, and I'm talking about in all frames, not just, I'm talking about skill sets, I'm talking about infrastructure, I'm talking about sustainable energy, these kinds of things. As those progress, the opportunity to not just be a nearshore partner for U.S. demand is going to extend greatly, right? Now, that might be propagated by what happens in, I won't go there, but a couple of us are sitting in countries where there's an election going to be happening in the not so distant future. Both in the U.S. and here, right? So these things could take on a whole new life of its own, depending upon what choices are being made. And I'm not going to ask you to talk about politics or religion, but I guess we are. But also be aware of what the potential of supply chain shifts that could happen with the amount of aggressive wars that are happening around the globe. A success, and I'm not going to define what success is, but if Russia deems themselves successful on Ukraine, make no mistake about it, China's going to leverage that on Taiwan and Hong Kong. That's going to reshape supply chains around the globe, because the Western community will react very negatively. China's response will be they will become more insular. Exports, they will not be exporting. They will keep critical minerals, for example. Remember that China still processes 80% of the EV batteries that are going into all of our aspirational electric cars. TSMC produces about 75% of the wafer fabrication for semiconductor products in Taiwan. If these regions get continuously disrupted, and there is unfortunately leveraging of Russia's advancement into the Ukraine, it has a lot of geopolitical instability that we need to be concerned about. Way beyond what you're seeing right now, and some degree of de-risking on China Plus One. I'm talking about borders could shut down and trade relations would cease on some of these things.
Douglas, we have a question from the chat.
Oh, good.
Online.
It wasn't a complaint that I cursed earlier? No.
There was too many complaints and one question, so questions.
I'll just take the question.
Yeah. Basically, there's a question about your suggestions about improving the workforce or skilling the workforce, the blue-collar workforce.
Yeah, I mean, it's important that we don't try to, what we oftentimes refer to as like peanut butter spread it, right? It's not like you can just, I would suggest not just blindly throwing money into the problem, right? Let's be specific about what our needs are. That's why I'm really highly encouraging you to take advantage of the supply chain maturity assessment. What you will likely find, as most companies do, if I take a look at that collective set of processes, remember, plan, order, source, transform, fulfill, return, you're going to see a wide differential of maturity, which means the effective nature of end-to-end is jeopardized because we're mature in some areas than others. It means that our return on investment on the areas where we're highly mature is probably less effective than it could be because our end-to-end is not at the same level of maturity. So use these kinds of tools, as well as our talent assessment, which is available to corporate members, etc. Use tools to build effective development plans for your employees. And also recognize, particularly one of the reasons we build the foundations modules, is recognize that it's not just about investing in supply chain, it's also investing in what we call supply chain adjacents. Finance, HR, IT, people who have to interface with supply chain but need also to understand what we're trying to do, understand the language. So, educate also beyond just the discipline in and of itself. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you.
Sorry about the complaints. No.
Any other questions? Or? Well, if there's no other questions, we would like to thank Douglas for coming again. Excellent presentation. So I think this topic is going to be trending for a while. and I hope you get some insights of what's happening. And I think you have to take an action plan to prepare for this. So thank you. We're going to have a networking session. They're going to be here, some drinks, some food. So you want to talk with Douglas or someone else, or meet some of the participants, please be my guest to stay for a little while. You don't want to spend much time in traffic. Right now it's awful, so you better stay here.